In September of 2009, experienced Mount Shasta Ranger Braden Taylor went out on his regular lone patrol. He was supposed to return in 3 days, but the connection was cut off, and the trail he had taken remained empty. 6 years passed, and when a group of climbers stumbled upon a horse skeleton stuck in a deep crevasse of Ash Creek Canyon with pieces of a service saddle strap, they didn't know they had discovered the first material clue to one of Northern California's most mysterious disappearances. The morning of September 17, 2009, began quietly. It was the usual pre-autumn chill at the Forest Service base in Mount Shasta as 38-year-old Ranger Braden Taylor prepared to go on a 3-day patrol. According to his colleagues, he arrived before dawn, checked his saddle and tools, and signed in the logbook with the exact route as required by protocol. His horse, Jack, an old Welsh bay, stood by the fence, calmly pacing. Taylor didn't like to talk too much before he left. His colleagues recalled that he looked focused but calm, as he always did before a long day's work in the mountains. The route entered in the logbook provided for eastward movement along the Ash Creek Trail, then to reach the upper reaches of the McCloud River and return to base no later than the evening of September 19th. The order Taylor had received the day before included a mandatory inspection of the area around the abandoned Rock Quarry. In recent weeks, isolated cases of gunfire at night and fresh tire tracks that could indicate poaching activity had been reported in the area. The quarry was officially closed more than a decade ago, but the remoteness of the site and the intricate forest roads created ideal conditions for illegal operations. At 7 o'clock in the morning, she said, the dispatcher received a detailed report from Taylor on the patrol plan. He named the landmarks where he planned to spend the night and the intermediate points from which he was to make radio contact. Everything was in line with standard procedure. Brett Goddard, the base's mechanic on duty, saw Taylor leave the yard, holding himself steady in the saddle, as if he were one with the horse. The witness recalled that Jack was moving at a steady trot toward the woods, and a few minutes later, the two disappeared into the fog, which was thicker than usual that morning between the pines. The next confirmed contact with Taylor occurred around 1 p.m., when a truck driver for the Sierra Timber Company was driving through the Ash Creek area. According to the driver, he saw the ranger on horseback a few dozen yards away. He was heading toward the Ash Creek Butte slope, and the horse was walking at a steady, leisurely pace. The driver recalled a simple greeting, a raised hand, and then Taylor disappeared between the trees. It was the last recorded moment anyone saw him alive. On September 19th, at the appointed time of contact, the radio remained silent. At first, the dispatcher assumed that Taylor was in an area where the signal was poor, but as the evening wore on, concern grew. According to the protocol, a ranger who does not get in touch for more than 3 hours is considered potentially missing. At 20 o'clock, an initial search was officially launched. The next morning, a group of 6 rangers set out on the Ash Creek Trail, following the route Taylor had marked out. The first tracks were found quickly, Jack's distinctive hoofprints on the damp ground after the night's fog. They were clear, well-preserved, and headed in the right direction. But then the situation changed. As they approached the rocky outcrops at the foot of Ash Creek Butte, the tracks became less and less visible, and after a few hundred yards, they disappeared completely, as if the horse had jumped a few meters up or had disappeared between the rocks altogether. Experts who later analyzed the site noted that the surface in this area consists of sharp granite and lava fragments that hardly retain traces. Any horseman could pass through here and leave nothing behind. Attempts to find at least some additional signs of movement, fragments of equipment, pieces of belts, traces of struggle, yielded nothing. Not even dry branches freshly broken by animals or people were found. According to experts, the site looked as if no one had been there for many days. This seemed abnormal to the searchers. The horse is massive, and usually even a stone has at least minimal signs of its passage. The search continued day after day. CalSAR volunteers, dog handlers, and National Guard soldiers with a helicopter for aerial reconnaissance joined the operation. The dogs were launched from different points. They picked up Taylor's thin trail on the trail, but lost him every time in the same place, near the same rock scatter. The service's veterinarian, who was asked to assess the situation, later noted that the dog's behavior indicated an abrupt break in the scent path, as if the horse and rider had disappeared into thin air. For 3 weeks, the team combed the slopes of Ash Creek Butte, checking bear dens, crevasses, dry streams, and abandoned hunting shelters. Helicopters flew over the area from different heights, but the dense crowns of fir and pine trees obscured most of the land. Even a thermal imager showed nothing but chaotic spots of heat from the animals. On the 24th day of the official operation, when almost all realistic areas of Taylor's possible location had been worked out, the headquarters decided to end the active phase of the search. The case was classified as missing under unexplained circumstances and transferred to the archive. An official report drawn up in those days noted that the absence of any traces of the horse or equipment was atypical and unexplained. The documents also recorded a contradiction. The route was not difficult for an experienced ranger, the weather was stable, and the risks were minimal. Taylor, according to his colleagues, was disciplined and used to mark his way. But the forest was silent. The only thing that remains of that patrol is an entry in the logbook, hoofprints that ended in the middle of a rocky area, and the silence that has since enveloped the slopes of Ash Creek. August 2015 was a hot August, and Ash Creek Canyon was dry, cracked, and smelled like hot rocks. This part of the eastern slopes of Shasta is almost inaccessible to ordinary tourists. Narrow ridges, loose slopes, wind-polished ledges, between which it is easy to get lost, even for experienced travelers. It was here that a group of climbers from Redding, 3 men who intended to go through one of the old technical routes marked on the map back in the 90s by certified instructors, set out. Around noon, according to one of them, the sun was almost vertical when they rounded a large stone ledge and came to a narrow shelf hanging over a deep crack. One of the climbers, the youngest in the group, noticed something light below, contrasting with the tarry black shadow of the fissure. At first, he thought it was a piece of a trunk or the dried skin of some wild animal that had been dragged down by the storm. However, when he turned on his helmet light and directed a narrow beam into the depths, it became clear. There were bones. The crack was so narrow that an adult could barely put his hand through it, but in the depths, he could clearly see a massive chest and long forelimbs pressed against the stone walls. One of the climbers later said that at first it seemed unnatural, as if the animal had fallen from the sky. From above, the place was almost invisible. A rock ledge blocked the view, and only a certain angle revealed this dark vertical trap. The climbers described the find as not like a deer or a bear. The skeleton was larger, with disproportionately long limbs, and most importantly, fragments of leather belts were visible stuck between the slabs. One of the men was unable to get the straps, but noticed a metal ring eaten away by rust. They assumed that it could be a fragment of an old hunter's equipment or even a piece of an abandoned tourist saddle. According to the testimony made during the official interrogation, the group recorded the discovery on their GPS receiver with a camera, several photos of the crack, coordinates, and a short comment. The climbers then immediately contacted the Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office. They realized that they had found not just a dead animal. There had long been stories about a missing ranger in these mountains, and any clue could be important. Rangers and investigators arrived at the site, 5 people with technical equipment. According to the team leader, access to the fissure was more difficult than it might seem from the surface. The crack tapered downward and had jagged, sharp edges. The skeleton was stuck in the rock, as if it had been dragged in during the fall, and the stone edges closed over the animal's back. It wasn't easy to get it out. They had to use climbing ropes, slings, wooden spacers, and even small jacks to widen the hole. After several hours of work, the skeleton was brought to the surface. The bones were dry, the remains of the skin were partially preserved, but the most important were fragments of equipment. A piece of leather spring, a piece of belt with traces of factory embossing, and most importantly, a part of a horseshoe. On its inner side, there are remnants of markings. Later, experts would note that this marking corresponded to a series of horseshoes that the Mount Shasta base installed on its service horses in the late 2000 years. During the examination, a veterinary specialist called to the gorge noticed an old fused injury to the animal's left front leg, a characteristic, easily recognizable injury. It was described in detail in the base's documents. Jack, Ranger Braden Taylor's service horse, had suffered a fracture a few years before he disappeared, and after treatment, he walked with a subtle asymmetry. Examination of the bones from the found animal fully matched this characteristic. The findings were checked against veterinary records, and experts had no doubt that it was Jack. The news spread quickly through the services. The case, which had been considered hopeless for 6 years, suddenly received the first material evidence. This opened the door to new questions. The investigators who arrived at the site recorded every detail of the terrain, the shape of the crack, the depth of the fault, the characteristic scratches on the stone that could indicate the animal's attempts to get out. None of this gave an answer to the main question: how the horse ended up at such an altitude in a narrow stone corridor several hundred yards from the route the ranger had planned to follow. There were no traces of Taylor's equipment nearby. There were no remnants of clothing, metal objects, a knife, a canteen, or any object that would even hint at his presence. There were no signs of a struggle, animals or people. The place looked as if the horse had somehow ended up here alone, which was unlikely from the point of view of experts, because the fault was located above the level of the trail, on a steep rock shelf where the animal could not have gotten there by accident. An examination conducted the next day officially confirmed the identification. Taylor's case was then immediately removed from the archive. The service's leadership noted in the report that the discovery made the accident version of the case unlikely and required a review of the entire story from scratch. A new note appeared in the official documents: probable criminal event. This meant that from that moment on, the search had to move to a different plane. The Rangers were instructed to check routes that had not been considered before, and Siskiyou County detectives began a formal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of the service horse and the possible forced disappearance of its rider. The discovery answered only one question: the fate of the horse. But the fate of Braden Taylor remained unknown. The cliff was silent, and the gorge, where the rescuers' footsteps echoed low and dry, seemed to hide more than it willingly revealed. The new investigation began with an itchy feeling that is familiar to all field forensic scientists. When the scene speaks quietly, but surely that the real story is not where they were looking for it before. After discovering the horse skeleton, the first task was to determine how the animal could have gotten into the gorge. Experts immediately ruled out a fall from below. The canyon's topography did not allow the horse to climb to that height on its own. The only possible direction was the plateau that rose above the fault by a good 100 feet. On the very first day after the discovery, a group of investigators climbed to the plateau. The ground there was hard, parched by the summer heat, but in some places there were characteristic indentations in the topsoil, as if something heavy had slipped or hit the surface. A broken young cedar tree was found in one of the plots. The trunk was broken at the height of a person's height, which could indicate a strong push or uncontrolled movement of a large animal. Traces of hair remained on the bark, which were later confirmed to belong to a horse. Experts described this area as a potential fall site. The line of prints on the ground led directly to the edge of the cliff, where the canyon crack started almost vertically. Judging by the damage to the bones, the horse did not fall freely. Its body seemed to be squeezed between the stone slabs, where it was stuck for years. It seemed unlikely that the animal had fallen alone in such a place, and this thought did not leave the investigators. While analyzing maps of the area, one of the rangers who had participated in the initial search operation back in 2009 remembered an important detail. According to him, Braden Taylor had one more item on his plan that day, checking the old Black Rock Quarry. This quarry is located just above the plateau where the traces of the horse's struggle were found. Back then, 6 years ago, this route did not become a key search area because the main tracks led in a different direction. This time, the quarry became the main point of interest. A mixed group of investigators, rangers, and forensic scientists went to the site. The road to Black Rock was an abandoned forest road, overgrown so densely that some areas had to be cleared by hand. When the group got to the quarry, it became clear that the place was not as dead as it had been thought for years. Traces of recent human presence were found on the territory. Under a large spruce branch was an old barrel with charred edges. It was probably used to make a fire. Empty propane canisters, plastic buckets with traces of dry crystalline substances, food bar wrappers, and dozens of bottles with labels worn off were lying around. The nature of the garbage was of interest to forensic experts. This kind of kit is often found in cases of illegal laboratories hidden in remote areas, where criminals use empty containers and chemicals to produce drugs. The buckets contained layers which were later sent for examination. Special attention was paid to a small piece of leather belt found at the foot of the quarry's stone wall. The belt was old and damaged, but the metal fragment of the clasp retained its serial markings. When it was cleaned, part of the number became visible, and it matched the number of the radio issued to Taylor in 2009. At that time, it was an old model range of radios used by only a few service veterans. This coincidence changed everything. If the belt belonged to Taylor's radio, then he was definitely in or near this quarry. This meant that Taylor's route was not just along the trail, he had reached Black Rock, and that is where his path was cut short. Investigators documented the exact location of the items found. The reports noted that the placement of garbage and fire marks indicated the regular presence of a group of people over a long period of time. The fact that the site was located high on a slope in a place without official access roads reinforced the suspicion that it was not tourists or casual hunters who came here. In one of the corners of the quarry, the team found another detail: fresh tire tracks, half eroded by the rain. According to technical experts, they belonged to a truck with a small carrying capacity. This could indicate that the illegal activity continued after the ranger's disappearance. After the inspection, all the findings were recorded in the protocols, and the quarry was declared an area of interest. The head of the investigative team officially stated that the investigation was moving from the mode of unexplained circumstances to possible criminal interference. What was most impressive was that the findings directly linked the quarry, illegal activity, and Taylor's route. Investigators noted that many facts that seemed minor 6 years ago now took on new significance. In particular, Internal Forest Service records mentioned reports of nighttime gunfire and vehicle movements in the area during the winter before the ranger's disappearance. The case was quickly reclassified. The documents now read, "A possible criminal incident involving unidentified persons." The investigation opened up a new direction: the search for groups or individuals who could have been conducting illegal activities in the Black Rock Quarry in 2009. For the first time in many years, a thread appeared in that the case had a thread that could lead to an answer, a thread that stretched from the abandoned quarry to the plateau, from the plateau to a crack in the rock, and from that crack to 6 years of silence. After the findings in the Black Rock Quarry, the investigation moved forward, but the new direction required more than just analyzing the traces. It was necessary to find people who could have been around in September 2009. The quarry had long been considered abandoned, but its isolated location made it an ideal place for those who didn't want to be seen. For the first week, detectives checked Siskiyou County archives, old reports of illegal parking, records of homeless camps, anything that had even a hint of outsiders being near Mount Shasta at the time. In one of the protocols, they found a mention of a man who was living in a makeshift tent camp in the woods a few miles from the city at the time. He had been detained after Taylor's disappearance for petty shoplifting. Now he was serving time in a state prison. It was to him that the investigators went. According to prison officials, the man, who was in his mid-50s, was aloof and reluctant to make contact. During the first conversation, he refused to answer questions about the events of many years ago. Only after it was explained to him that it was not about his guilt, but about the investigation into the death of a civil servant, did he agree to listen to the investigators. His testimony seemed fragmentary, but it is in such small details that the truth is often hidden. He said that in those years he collected scrap metal and periodically came to the abandoned quarry to look for the remains of equipment, wires, and anything else that could be sold. In September of 2009, he thinks, in the evening he came to the edge of the quarry and heard a strange humming noise, not like an engine, but rather like the noise of burners and fans. As he got closer, he saw a light from below and shadows moving between the concrete blocks. He said he didn't understand what was going on at the time, but the smell was distinctive, pungent, chemical, the same smell he had smelled before in places where homeless people sometimes cooked methamphetamine in artisanal conditions. That evening, he noticed something else. According to the man, he saw a rider on the upper terrace of the quarry, a silhouette against the backdrop of a lantern. The horse stopped near a pile of old barrels, and a man in a service uniform, as he thought at the time, dismounted and began to inspect the area with a lantern. Now the investigators realized it was Braden Taylor. Then the events suddenly changed. The witness described sharp screams, a sound similar to barking dogs. He claimed to have heard a man scream, short, sharp, as if interrupted. After that, he said, he got scared, stepped back, and ran down to his path, not intending to interfere. He left, but before he did, he looked back for a few seconds. On the lower platform, he saw two men near an SUV parked on the side of the old road. They were loading something into the trunk. He did not see what exactly, but the objects were heavy. It was obvious from their movements. When the investigators asked him to describe the men, he said that one was stocky, wearing a work jacket, and the other was thinner, wearing a cap. He did not know any names, but he recalled that in those years in the homeless camp, people talked about a certain Miller. He was either an organizer of temporary crews at dubious construction sites, or a middleman in trade, or someone who was the owner of criminal schemes in the area. The man emphasized that he was not sure if the Miller was among the people in the quarry that night, but the name was associated with that particular area and those suspicious activities. Investigators took these words cautiously, but as a working thread. A few days later, they expanded their search to county archives and business records. Miller's name came up more than once, but one last name stood out: Clayton Miller. The documents indicated that he was the owner of the construction company Sierra Construction, which operated between 2008 and 2010. The company was closed suddenly, without explanation, after several inspections due to safety violations and suspicions of illegal use of unlicensed workers. In unofficial reports, this company was listed as one of those that could be engaged not only in construction work, but also in the transportation of additional cargo to hard-to-reach areas, including the very slopes where Braden Taylor disappeared. Next, we had to check one more detail. In the archival documents of the Rock Quarry, there were old records of equipment purchases about a year before the ranger disappeared. They included a supplier who often worked with Sierra Construction. This strengthened the connection. Investigators began to compile a list of people who might have worked for Miller in those years. But many of them disappeared from the radar. Some moved away, others changed their documents, and some were imprisoned for minor offenses. Nevertheless, the puzzle began to take shape. For the first time, the investigation had something that had been missing for 6 years: a human witness who saw those places at the right time. His testimony did not provide a complete picture, but it did open the door to people who had never been considered seriously before. Clayton Miller's name now appeared in the official documents not as a technical reference, but as the first real lead that could bring the investigation closer to answering a question that had remained unanswered for far too long. After Clayton Miller's name was established, the investigation moved into a new phase. Now it was not just a reconstruction of the events of a long time ago, but an attempt to disassemble a multi-level system of shadow business that had existed for many years under the guise of a construction company. In the official documents, Sierra Construction was mentioned as a small firm that performed seasonal work in the district. But when the detectives pulled out the books, collected testimonies from former employees, and compared the routes of the equipment, it became obvious that the construction was just a bubble. The company had no regular customers, did not buy building materials, and its main expenses were for fuel for transport, generators, and chemicals that had nothing to do with construction. This was consistent with the assumption that Miller was using remote areas on the slopes of Shasta to produce drugs, moving mobile laboratories from place to place to avoid detection. The first person to be contacted was a driver who worked for Sierra Construction in 2009. He was found in a small town in California where he worked at a car wash. He agreed to talk only after he was convinced that investigators were not going to charge him with any crimes. According to him, Miller was not just supervising a construction crew. He was leading a small group that was engaged in what the man described as delivery and support. There were many inconsistencies in his words, but the general picture was clear. Under the guise of construction work, Miller's men transported equipment, canisters, chemicals, and guarded temporary camps. One of these places was the Rock Quarry. The driver recalled that in September of that year, he was working in an old cargo pickup truck. On the day the ranger disappeared, in the evening, he overheard a conversation between two Miller employees. They were anxious, speaking in whispers, and mentioning the word ranger several times. One of them said that he's coming and that they needed to tell their boss. The employee, who later agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claimed that he made the call to Miller himself. Then the events unfolded quickly. According to the driver, about an hour after the call, Miller showed up at the base where some of the equipment was located at the time. He arrived in a dark SUV with two people. They did not speak to anyone, did not give orders, but it was obvious that they were in a hurry. The three got into the car and drove off in the direction of the quarry without taking any construction tools with them. The driver said that this trip was not typical. Usually Miller kept a low profile, gave orders from a distance, and hardly ever went out in person. But that evening, according to the witness, he was pale, nervous, and silent. When they returned, it was already dark. The driver remembered it clearly. He was servicing the generator at the time and saw the car pull into the site. The SUV was covered in dust and had a scratched side, as if it had hit a rock outcropping. Miller immediately ordered two of his men to wash the car. This surprised the witness because no one had ever washed the company's SUVs before. The dirt protected them from staining and unnecessary questions. While washing the car, he heard a phrase he remembered verbatim. One of the men told the other that it was an accident, he just fell. The witness didn't know who they were talking about, but now, 6 years later, he was able to put the events together for the first time. His testimony was a turning point. The county detectives filed a court request to search Miller's private property. The warrant stated that it was necessary to find items that could have remained after a possible conflict in the Rock Quarry, as well as documents confirming the company's illegal activities. The search was scheduled for the morning. Investigators described Miller's house as large but abandoned, a two-story building on the outskirts of the city, with a metal shed and a garage with two unmarked cars. In the yard, they found the remains of tools, parts of generators, plastic barrels, and traces of chemical canisters. An old workshop behind the house attracted special attention. It contained leather belts, ropes, rough work gloves, and tools. Dried traces of a dark adhesive substance were found on one of the tables, which forensic experts later classified as a possible mixture of several chemicals related to methamphetamine production. No direct connection to Taylor was found at this point, but it wasn't just the items that mattered. It was the fact that they confirmed the witnesses' words. The investigation had every right to move on, and every next step suggested that Miller and his people knew much more about the events of that September evening than had once been thought. After the search of Clayton Miller's house, investigators returned to the map of the Black Rock area. All the items found confirmed illegal activity, but did not provide a direct link to Braden Taylor. Therefore, the investigation was again focused on the area where he could have been in the last hours of his life. On the map, a small artificial pond marked as a technical reservoir from the quarry's days caught the eye. It was a few hundred yards east of the plateau where the horse had fallen. The pond was a nondescript-looking pond, overgrown with vegetation and several tens of feet in diameter, that had not been used for a long time. But old quarry workers noted in their official documents that the depth of the pond was as deep as a person's height, and the bottom was uneven and muddy. It was the kind of place that could have been a hiding place. Investigators invited a diving team. According to one of the rescuers, the water in the pond was dark, heavy with silt and plant debris. Visibility was almost zero. Therefore, they dived slowly, touching the bottom with their hands. The first few minutes were fruitless. Only stones, tree fragments, and rusty metal plates that had once been used to mount the pumps. But after a while, one of the divers signaled that he had found a large object wrapped in something dense. The object was heavy and buried in the silt. They used slings and a hand winch to lift it. When the object was pulled ashore, it became clear that it was not technical equipment. In front of the investigators was an old tarpaulin, tightly pulled together with ropes that were already spreading over time. The fabric had dark spots, and the inside had an uneven, broken contour. The investigators carefully cut the ropes and bent the tarpaulin. What they saw confirmed the worst assumptions. Inside was a severely damaged human skeleton. Some ribs were broken, part of the spine had separated from the body. The bones still had shreds of fabric on them that looked like the remains of a service shirt. The search for evidence began immediately. In his trouser pocket, they found a key with a metal keychain with a barely visible erased Forest Service logo. Next to it was a small knife with a wooden handle with the initials BT carved into it. This was the knife Braden Taylor used in the service, as evidenced by property records. The pieces of tarpaulin were tangled with fragments of fabric that had once been part of a patch with the patrol's emblem. The man's identity was confirmed a few hours later. It was Braden Taylor. But the main thing was waiting inside his chest. A pathologist working at the scene found a metal object in the body cavity. It was taken out along with a rib fragment. Further analysis confirmed that it was a deformed bullet of a revolver caliber, popular with local hunters and loggers. This type of weapon was often used by men from heavy brigades working in remote areas. The expert noted that the death was caused by a gunshot wound to the chest. The blow was direct and close, judging by the nature of the deformation. Two other items of importance to the investigation were found near the body: Taylor's gun and his radio. Both were unloaded. The gun showed no signs of having been fired that day. This could mean several things. Either Taylor was taken by surprise, or he did not have time or did not dare to use the weapon. For investigators, this was an important detail. If Taylor was disarmed before the shooting, the conflict was sudden. If he did not pull out a gun, the attackers acted quickly and in an organized manner. The discovery finally eliminated the main version that had been raised most often: a possible accident or fall. Now it was obvious. It was a murder. An official report drawn up in those days stated, "We have the body, the murder weapon, and confirmation of a gunshot wound. The place of concealment indicates premeditation and an attempt to disguise the death of a civil servant." The investigation has moved into the phase of searching for specific individuals. The pond, which for years seemed to be an ordinary body of water, suddenly became a key place in the case. The very fact that the body was wrapped in a tarpaulin and flooded indicated an attempt not only to get rid of the evidence, but also to stall for time, hoping that nature would hide the traces forever. The chemicals, equipment, and traces of activity in the quarry that had been discovered nearby now formed a single line. Taylor had witnessed something he should not have seen, and it cost him his life. After the body of Braden Taylor was found in a pond near the Rock Quarry, the investigation ceased to be a case of a long-standing disappearance. It became a case of the murder of a public servant, hidden under a layer of silt, tarps, and 6 years of silence. The pressure on Miller's men increased. Some were summoned again, some were found in other states. Most refused to talk, saying they didn't see anything or had nothing to do with that area. But a few people changed their behavior after the news of the remains. Investigators pointed out in the report that fear returned to these people immediately. Not fear of the law, but fear that the truth might move the events they had tried to forget. Some feared Miller's revenge, others feared losing their jobs or status among those who still maintained ties to the old group. The change came when one of the people closest to Miller agreed to talk. His name is not disclosed in the documents. He is listed as Witness A. He worked in the quarry during those years, transporting equipment, sometimes helping with the movement of chemicals, and most importantly, he was there the night Braden Taylor stumbled upon their illegal lab. Witness A agreed to the deal only after the lawyer explained to him that the body had been found, the forensic examination had been conducted, the revolver caliber had been identified, and the burden of proof was inescapable. The psychological pressure was exacerbated by internal factors. According to the investigators, the man looked exhausted, haunted by nightly lapses and feelings of guilt. He spoke slowly, often pausing, but the essence of his testimony was clear. The night Taylor went to check on the quarry, 3 people were working in the lab. One of them heard the sound of hooves and thought it was a hunter. When the ranger appeared on the upper platform, the men realized there was no chance of hiding the activity. According to the witness, Miller did not hesitate for a second. He ordered him and another employee to neutralize the ranger. The witness claimed that he did not know how this was to be done, but the order sounded harsh and clear. According to him, the fight was short. Taylor tried to get closer, to understand what was happening, but one of the employees intercepted him on the slope. A struggle ensued, followed by a shot. A witness stated that he was not the shooter. The second man, who was later identified, was the owner of a revolver of the same caliber that experts later recovered from Braden's chest. Witness A described how they stood there for several minutes, not knowing what to do next. Miller approached them after the shooting. He did not yell, but spoke briefly, ordering them to remove the body. According to the witness, those present were shocked, but did everything automatically. Then the testimony became even more gruesome. They hid the body by wrapping it in a tarpaulin, which they always kept in the quarry, just in case. But they also had to get rid of the horse. Miller was afraid that the hoof prints would lead directly to the laboratory. Witness A described the moment with the animal as follows. They led the horse to a narrow rock shelf above the gorge. The animal was nervous and stumbled. One of the men hit it with a rope, trying to force it to go further. The horse got scared, took a few chaotic steps, and fell down. They expected the tracks they found to look like an accident. It was then that they realized they needed to hide Taylor's body as well. Returning to the lower part of the quarry, the men wrapped a tarpaulin with ropes and brought it to the old technical pond. The witness described how they immersed the bundle in water until it disappeared under the surface. All these actions, he said, took place under Miller's direct supervision. For the investigation, the testimony was crucial. They closed the gaps that remained after the horse and body were found. And most importantly, they named the specific person who pulled the trigger. After interrogating witness A, investigators formally requested the arrest of the second participant, the one who owned a revolver of a caliber that matched the ballistics analysis of the bullet from Taylor's body. His name appeared in the documents as the main perpetrator. The Internal Affairs report stated that witness A's testimony was consistent, supported by material evidence, and consistent with the results of the examinations. The detectives recommended that the second suspect be immediately detained before the information leaked further, and he disappeared. The split in Miller's group was the first real movement toward accountability. For the first time in years, someone who had seen the events with their own eyes broke the silence. The trial of Clayton Miller and his accomplice began in a large district courtroom where, on the first day, journalists, relatives of the victims, and former employees of Sierra Construction, who no longer hid the fact that they had been afraid of the man for years, gathered. The atmosphere was tense. Almost everyone in the room knew about the 6 years of unanswered questions, the ranger's search, the horse skeleton found in the rock, and the body pulled from the pond. The prosecutor's office prepared an indictment that consisted of dozens of pages. It described Miller's activities, from an illegal laboratory in the Rock Quarry to intimidating workers and using violence against anyone who could interfere with his business. The prosecution was based on the testimony of a man who cooperated with the investigation. In the materials, he was listed as Witness A. It was his words that connected the events of that evening into a coherent picture. Taylor's arrival, Miller's order to take out the ranger, the shot, the fall of the horse, and the hiding of the body. The prosecutor read out key parts of his testimony slowly, with pauses, so that the jury heard not just the facts, but the chronicle of how a public servant who was doing his duty died. The expert testimony complemented this picture. Ballistics confirmed that the bullet matched the revolver found on Miller's accomplice. Forensic experts described in detail the nature of the injuries. Chemists described the composition of the substances found in buckets and canisters at the quarry. Miller sat motionless, listening with a stone face. According to reporters, he spoke for the first time only on the third day of the trial, when his lawyer asked for permission to speak. Miller claimed that he did not order the use of force, that the shot was a mistake, and that he was only trying to handle the situation. But the prosecutor's office immediately reminded the jury of the chronology of events. It was after the call about the ranger's appearance that Miller went to the quarry, and it was after his visit that Taylor's body disappeared. Miller's accomplice chose a different strategy. He pleaded guilty to firing the shot and said it happened during a struggle. His testimony did not save Miller, but legitimized the fact of the fight. However, a comparison of the defendant's words with the testimony of Witness A revealed discrepancies. According to the witness, the fight was short, and the shot was fired after Miller ordered to take out the ranger. This statement, voiced in court, caused the first real movement in the room. Someone sighed softly, someone tilted their head. The key evidence remained the items found in the pond: keys with the service emblem, a knife with initials, fragments of a patch, an unloaded pistol and radio, and a tarpaulin in which the body was wrapped. The prosecutor emphasized that no one wraps their own accident in a tarpaulin and drowns themselves in a technical tank. The jury was shown photographs of the area, the plateau above the gorge, where they found traces of the horse's struggle and traces of dragging, the exact area of the plateau from which the animal was provoked to fall. The comparison showed that everything corresponded to the witness's words. The testimony of chemists and specialists from drug laboratories was a separate block. They described the available substances, reagent residues, dishes, and barrels with characteristic crystal traces. This was strong evidence that Miller was indeed engaged in illegal production and thus had a direct motive to conceal the activity and neutralize anyone who could expose it. The trial lasted several weeks. During this time, the parties exchanged dozens of documents, expert testimony, witnesses, and reassessment of details. All the threads came back to the same place. the abandoned Black Rock Quarry, where the interests of the criminals and the ranger's duty converged. Clayton Miller was found guilty on several charges, including organizing a criminal gang, drug production, and contract killing of a public servant. The verdict included life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The accomplice, who was the shooter, was sentenced to 25 years. His cooperation and confession were credited to him, but the judge emphasized that the fact that he pulled the trigger did not make him less responsible. Taylor's colleagues were present in the courtroom when the verdict was announced. They recognized the things on the screen that they saw in his saddlebag. They knew the voice that came through the radio. They remembered him as a man who explored the forest, not for work, but for love. Braden Taylor's remains were buried with proper honors at Mount Shasta Cemetery. The ceremony was attended not only by employees, but also by local residents, former volunteers of the search operation, and those who had been hoping for years to find at least a trace of his fate. Service protocols changed after this incident. In remote areas, temporary construction crews were regularly inspected, ranger routes were recorded in more detail, and control over the legality of work in the mountains was tightened. The forest that Taylor had protected during his lifetime was only at peace when his story came to an end, not accidental, not forgotten, but established by a court of law. And the pine trees on the slopes among which he disappeared now stood not only as silent witnesses to the tragedy, but as a memory of a man who fulfilled his duty to the last step.